Hello and welcome once again to Passion, Purpose and Grit with Goldster and with the Sporting Memories Foundation. Today's guest is a sporting pioneer, and what perfect timing in a week when the media at last is starting to celebrate the brilliance of English sportswomen, the Lionesses in the quarterfinals of the Euros, got the World Championships in athletics, England's cricketers completing a clean sweep in the one-dayers against South Africa. We've got a real genuine pioneer of the sport, a woman whose name really is almost synonymous with English women's rugby. This is Gill Burns. As a player, she not only founded the women's section at Waterloo, but turned out for them nearly 300 times. She not only helped to organise the first international she ever played in, but went on to win 70 plus caps for England, captaining them to their first ever World Cup success. She played in 4 World Cups in total and achieved just about every honour the game has to offer. Then she became an administrator, president of the Rugby Football Union for Women, first woman to be elected as a privileged member of the Rugby Football Union, inducted into the Hall of Fame in 2014, and as Stephen Jones of the Sunday Times put it, a genuine 24-carat English sporting heroine. So it's a very, very warm welcome to Gill Burns. Hi, Gill, and welcome, and thank you so much for joining us on a day.
Good morning. Thank you so much for that wonderful introduction. Yeah, say some lovely things. Thank you.
And it'd be great, really, if we started by going back to the very beginning. Do you come from a sporting background?
Yeah, really. I was a very, very keen sporty child. My dad was a good sportsman in his youth, played rugby, did athletics. My mum was a dancing teacher, in fact. So as soon as I was born, I was on the stage performing. And in fact, I was on the stage 6 months pregnant, my mum was, and she did the can-can apparently. So there's lots of reasons why I've been shaken around from an early age. So yeah, so I've been involved in dance and sport from, right from the start. So yeah.
And I read from the biography, you swam, played hockey, basketball, athletics for the British colleges. So why rugby?
Because rugby was the right sport for me. I played lots of sports, not just the 4 that I did at university. I played everything I could as a child and was reasonably good at everything. I had lots of coaches asking me to specialise in their sport, but I didn't love their sport enough to give the others up. But it only took 1 training session. I was a PE teacher, age 23, went to 1 rugby training session, and I knew within that hour that I'd found the sport that was right for me, and I never looked back from that point.
Did you ever try and analyse why you thought it was right for you? What was the special ingredients? It was
that feeling, that absolute sort of ultimate sport challenge to get the ball over that line, to work with teammates who all had different skills and different qualities, and it just seemed to fit me as well. I was a sort of 12-second 100-meter sprinter. I was 12 and a half stone at the time, so I was heavy but fast. I had a great elevation. I was springy. Line-outs were right up my street, and picking up the ball and running and pushing people out of the way was so much fun. Having enjoyed things like netball, but they were so restrictive, and I'd also enjoyed as a young girl to play the games that were traditionally boys' games. So I played at primary school with the lads at break, but wasn't allowed to play in the team. But in secondary school, I'd been given the chance to play basketball with the boys. Thoroughly enjoyed it. It was a bit more dynamic than netball, and then knew that games that were traditionally called boys' games weren't boys' games. They were games for anybody who wanted to play. So when I gave rugby a go, I just loved everything about it. So many lovely people as well, and that's often a thing. If you get on with everybody who's at the rugby club, you've found your second home, and that's what I did. And
many sports people I've spoken to point to they're growing up in their introduction to sport, and many of them have a common, there's one person in particular, a special teacher, somebody who encouraged them, and they look back and say, that was the person that did it for me. Have you got someone in your past from that?
Well, my mum and dad were the obviously as a very small child, but my PE teacher at secondary school, a chap called Bill Ford, who was a good cricketer, he gave me the opportunity to try the so-called boys' games. And if he'd not said, we could have a go, me and my friend Jane, who was also a good sort of county level hockey player and stuff, we were given the chance to play with the boys and give it a go, and we absolutely loved it. So he was the one that made me think, if you want to play a sport, you can play it and go out there and do it. So thanks to Bill Ford.
Yeah. And how did the boys react when you joined in their games and beat them and things?
They were a bit sheepish at first. I can remember it clearly. It was like Kes. Bill Ford said to the two big lads, "You're the two captains, stand at the front, pick your team." And Jane and I were, of course, the last two to be picked. The second week, we weren't quite the last. We were moving gradually because we were both good. We were both good sportswomen. So by the end of the half term, we were the captains picking the teams, and it was great. They accepted us because they could see we could play, and it was only because we were naturally quite able, and we used to go before school to practice so that next week we'd be better. So we fitted in, and hopefully those boys realised that girls could play sport too.
But even so, there was a big hurdle in terms of rugby, particularly, which has had that, still does to a certain extent, have the macho image of men's sport and brutality and the drinking culture and everything that goes with our traditional ideas of rugby. How much of that was that a deterrent to you and an obstacle?
I just decided it wasn't going to be an obstacle. I've gone to places, I've been a token woman in rooms, I've tried to sort of establish that the women aren't here, we're not playing games, we thoroughly enjoy rugby and we just want to come in and have a little bit of what you've enjoyed for a long time. And I think you've just got to very gradually foster respect. And once you've fostered respect, people start to notice. And it's a long, slow process of sort of becoming established as part of the game, and not to get knocked back by the negative comments, the misogynistic comments, the criticism. I've been abused in gyms because I've been lifting weights that were heavy and things like that. And you just think, I'm a bigger person. I'm not going to get upset by it. I'm not going to argue back. I'm not going to get myself upset by it. I will use it as another sort of thing to make you stronger and to move forward more positively, and just find enough people that want to listen and watch, and we're getting there. We're getting to there now. It's great.
And if it wasn't an obstacle, I wonder how much in the other way it was a sort of spur in a way that you said, "I'm going to bloody show you." Was that a motivation for you as well?
Very much so. And I can remember the first international I played in, I also organised with my ex-partner Steve, who the two of us just decided we'd organise the game at Waterloo, and then I ended up playing in it, which I never dreamed I would have been even picked. Yeah. After that game, I can remember the crowds had come in. We'd advertised as best we could in the Liverpool area, and there was hundreds and hundreds of people came in. It was a really good, the Waterloo traditional old club was full of crowd. Anyway, after the game, we'd beaten Sweden, I think 40-0, and it was quite an entertaining game, a little bit one-sided, but the crowd saw some good skills. And afterwards, one of the Alacadoos, one of the old chaps in the bar, who called me over and he said, "Can I just have a word with you, please?" And he said, "I have to admit, I came today to watch tits and bums," and I thought, "Oh no, here we go again, another." Oh. But he said, "But you know what, Gill, after 5 minutes, I realised I was watching a bloody good game of rugger." And I'll never forget that, because he admitted why he turned up. Yeah. But he actually admitted, you know what, it was better than I thought. It was a rugby game. It was a quality rugby game. And that was the sort of start of changing people's perceptions and ideas. And maybe if, half the people came through the door because they wanted to watch England against Sweden rolling around in the mud. Yeah. And even if half of those people went out saying, "My God, we watched a really good game of rugby," we'd started to change people's perceptions then. And it's been a positive route since that. So you organised the first international. You also organised playing at Waterloo, because that wasn't your first club, was it? You played for one. Well, yeah, I joined in initially. We trained at Waterloo, but it was Liverpool Polytechnic student side. So that's who I went to join in with. And they said, "Please play with us." And I said, "Well, I'm not a student." And they said, "It doesn't matter. We're the only team in the area, and anyone who wants to play can join in." So for 2 years, I played along with Liverpool Polytechnic. But we trained and played all our games at Waterloo. So Waterloo was my club right from the word go, really. So 2 years with them. We were planning on hopefully one day asking the club if they would like to have a women's section. But I was glad to say partway through our second season, the president came forward and said, "We've had discussions on the football committee and we'd like to ask you, would you set up a women's section here?" So we'd been planning for 12 months to do it, but they didn't know that. They thought it was their idea. So that's always a good thing. And I'm very pleased to say that by the next September, we had a good team, which attracted a lot of players from the north of England. And we went on to play at the highest level. So, yeah, it was great.
Yeah, so having started a team, you've got a club, you persuaded the club to let you have a women's section. What sort of what was there a structure of the clubs to play against? How did the sort of the fixture list work?
Well, yeah, I mean, my good friend Carol Isherwood, who was part of that first group of women who set up the WRFU, the Women's Rugby Football Union, they set up way back, I think it was 84. So there was a Women's Rugby Union and there was a structure. And the first couple of years when I played with Liverpool Poly, it was just friendly games and student games and things like that. But by the time we set up with Waterloo, we were playing league matches. And yes, it was the same season Saracens set up, and we were going down to play teams like Saracens, Wasps, Richmond, Blackheath. We went all over the country. Every other weekend, we seemed to be driving down to London or somewhere equally as far away. But we had a structure, and we think we spent one season in the second division, and the rest of it was all in what was the Premiership of its day. And
obviously, women's rugby clubs would have been few and far between. So you must have clocked up a fair number of miles in the pursuit of fixtures.
I've lost count of the amount of miles we did. Yeah, a lot of travelling. Yeah, but it was all for a good reason, so didn't mind.
Yeah. Now, it was amateur in those days. Rugby. Men's rugby was amateur in those days. It's always a question of marrying a career with the sport you want to play, isn't it? How difficult, it must have been more difficult for women to do that, than men. I mean, I could go to my headmaster and say, look, I need time off to play in this game. But it must have been much more difficult because of the attitudes towards women's sport, or was it?
Well, I wouldn't say it was difficult. I loved it, and I wouldn't have done it if I didn't enjoy both parts of my life. I needed to be a teacher. I needed to earn money in order to play. So, yeah, the first school I was at, I had a very supportive head teacher to start with, who would let me go to fixtures. My pay would be docked, but they'd get somebody in to cover me, which was fine. But the last head teacher I had at my first school, she said that she wouldn't give me any more time off to play for England. So. Because when I went to the World Cup, she docked my pay and she didn't get anybody in to cover for me. So my friends and colleagues covered for me anyway for the 3 weeks for the World Cup in '94. So I knew I had to move on to a school that was supportive. And then I went to Range High School in Formby, which was fantastic. And from the word go, they were so supportive and proud of my achievements as well. And I'm so pleased to say over the years, there's lots of boys and girls from Range High who've gone on to play rugby. Two of the current Red Roses squad are Range High School pupils that were in my house. So delighted to see that progress that's been made, and the support from the school will always be appreciated.
Yeah, that must make you feel very proud to see that people are carrying the baton forward from where you were.
Very much so, but I mean, yeah, hugely exciting to see. It's Holly Aitchison and Sarah Beckett who are both playing in the Red Roses now, but I was equally proud to see a girl called Claire Rive, who was from my school, who was the first girl to play in, I think it was the first age group England team, so she played in what was at the time, I think it was under 19s and it was a curtain raiser before one of our games, so she played a game for an England representative team way back, probably the mid-90s, early 90s, mid-90s. And then I'm equally proud of another ex-pupil, Kate Avery, who is now a team manager in Stockport and is running a team herself, and a little sister who played at school is playing in that. And to see girls going on and not only playing the game, but doing their little bit to put back into the game is wonderful. Yeah.
So you're a teacher, you're in your 20s, you've played for England. Could you organised the game? You played for England. What was the international setup in those days? Was there a Six Nations? Was there how did playing for England work?
I think my first season for England, there was one game, England-Wales. That was the England fixture. And I was also proud to play one other game, which was a Great Britain game, and we played against France. And that first game for Great Britain was the first time France had been beaten. So it was a special memory. We played at Roslyn Park, and we had a great game against a very strong French team. But it meant that people from Wales and England could play together, so we were a little bit stronger at the time. And happy memories.
And when did the sort of the Six Nations, because now that there is a Women's Six Nations, which plays the same weekends as the men, or did?
I think I can't remember. I can't remember the actual date, but we started off with England, Wales. Then we had the home nations, which was great, and then we had obviously against France as well. Then Spain came in. Italy weren't as strong, so for a time, early 2000s, possibly late 90s, Spain was the sixth nation to be involved. And then eventually, of course, Italy got involved, quite rightly, because their men were too. So yeah, it's been a gradual process, and it's changed the structure and changed the shape through the years. But I can't remember the actual dates when it happened.
No, but
from one England-Wales game to a full Six Nations programme, and it's brilliant.
Yeah. And on to World Cups. And again, I was looking at this wonderful documentary series called The Story of Rugby. I think it's on Amazon Prime. Talking about the women actually organised their own first World Cup.
That's right, yeah. 4 of the girls from Debs Griffin, Mary Forsyth, Alice Cooper, Sue Dorrington, 4 girls from Richmond got together, and England RFU weren't keen to host it, so they said, you know what, we need to get this done, and they managed to get some support from Wales and hosted the game in Wales, and the girls just said, if nobody's going to do it for us, we'll do it ourselves, which was the attitude of those of us who played in the day. Yeah. At the time, we did it for selfish reasons, because we wanted to play and take part in it. Yeah. Obviously, the girls that organised the 91 World Cup, there's only Sue Dorrington who was involved in the actual playing side of things. The others were the first trailblazing pioneers that were there as administrators, and they were organising the whole thing, balancing having babies and families and balancing busy working lives alongside doing that. So yeah, cap off to them all. Everyone who organised stuff like that gave us another little step in the development of the game. So
yeah, I mean, World Cups now have got all the razzmatazz of broadcasts and sponsors and kit and all that sort of thing, but presumably starting from scratch and with none of those things, it must have been an extraordinary experience to be part of that.
It was, yeah, and I wouldn't change it for the world. It was what it was. That first World Cup was done within a week and a day. I think it was 8 days, start to finish. It was ridiculous. You played all your games, and in the World Cups, we were actually resting people, which didn't happen. Because before that, you picked your best team and you stayed on the pitch until you fell over and the doctor carried you off on a stretcher. So it was, trying to balance that. Using a squad and stuff. It was new, really, for us at that time, but. Yeah, it was absolutely fantastic, and each World Cup's got sort of bigger and better and added more and more. But genuinely, I wouldn't change any of it, because the memories of being involved in the early days were second to none.
And the start of the powerhouses of women's rugby in those days, the USA was always in my memory was always at the front running of women's rugby, and presumably New Zealand, because they're always at the front of everything to do with rugby. Were they the main challenges?
Well, I think the America were the strength. They were sort of far and away more experienced, probably fitter than the other teams way back in the early 90s. They beat New Zealand relatively convincingly in 91. New Zealand were a good team, but weren't the team they developed into in the late 90s. They came back with a bang when they actually got superb athletes later. But I think New Zealand became a strength in the mid to late 90s. I still think the 98 Black Ferns team was the best team of athletes I've ever seen that graced the field for New Zealand collectively. They've had a few individual superstars since that would perhaps make a world, the world's best Black Ferns team. But I think that 98 World Cup team were superb. But yeah, America were strong. They'd played a long time. They were streetwise. We were naive beginners, really. England were a team of more talented sportswomen who were learning rugby together under the watchful eye of the wonderful Jim Greenwood, followed by Steve Dowling, and those early coaches were teaching us, coaching us into rugby players, and we were using our transferable skills from other fields. But nevertheless, an elite team of sportswomen, and it was a pleasure to grace the field with them.
And to captain them, presumably, was an honour. But how difficult was it to marry people from all these different parts of the world and different backgrounds in rugby, experience of rugby, because obviously some people get more coaching than others and have a greater length of time playing the game. How difficult was it as captain to bring all that lot together on the field?
Well, first of all, I'd never dreamed I'd ever be captain. I was totally surprised and taken aback when I was asked to captain the game against Russia in the '94 World Cup, when our captain Karen Allman was rested. And I can remember thinking, I'd never even engaged my brain as to what you do as a rugby captain, because I'd done captaincy at the club, but I'd never dreamed I'd do it at a higher level. But yeah, it was thinking of the wonderful example that Karen set, and I just decided to lead from the front and just try and go forward in every facet of the game and bring the girls with me. It was nobody gave us any tips as to what you should say, what you should do. So I just thought, be yourself, and it worked very well. And then I was honoured to be asked to become the squad captain after the '94 World Cup, and thoroughly sort of grew into the role and thoroughly enjoyed the honour, just to try and bring everybody honours rugby players, and it was a huge privilege to do that job.
And when you got to lift the World Cup, what were your feelings then?
Primarily relief, because I'd had a mini asthma type panic attack when the final whistle went, and I realised we'd won. The crowd ran onto the field. I collapsed onto my knees and couldn't breathe, and people were hitting me and congratulating me, and I couldn't get my breath. And I think Karen and Janice, who were our captain and vice captain, had gone through the crowd, had got the trophy, and hundreds of people had gathered round, and I'm at the far end of, like, probably 50 yards away under a crowd of people congratulating me. So I was a bit later to actually touch the trophy, because gradually the girls were going up and there was being pushed towards the front, and I was just relieved I could breathe. And then when I actually got the trophy in my hand, it was like, oh my goodness, we've won. But yeah, special times with lots of great support. And even though the Scottish crowd were booing every time we scored one of our tries, and I think everybody in Scotland suddenly became an America supporter. After the game, everyone was wonderful, and as usual, we got the congratulations from everybody in the ground.
So as you say, this was in Scotland. What sort of crowds were women's matches starting to attract by then?
It depends which Scottish paper you read. It's ranged from 5,000 to 9,000. I'm going to say it was about 7,000 in the ground. And it was, because it was at Raeburn Place, it was temporary stands. It was crowded around the side. There was people on the roofs. We've got photographs of the walls with people hanging over. So if it was 5,000, there was a couple of thousand of extras. I don't know. So I'll just go slap bang in the middle. But the papers say different things. But a few thousand people. It seemed a big crowd that were mainly cheering for America. But it spurred us on. Any cheering spurs you on, whether it's for or against you. So,
and the England setup at that time. I mean, obviously you've now got World Cups. You're starting to be organised towards getting into regular international rugby. What about things like coaches and doctors and physios and all of those sorts of things, and sponsors and kit and everything that's now associated with the game?
Yeah,
they all came in a rush, or what?
No, our amateur administrators continued to do everything they could to try and accelerate all that. But, the team doctor was an ex-player who played for England A and gave up, drove herself to fixtures. And the physio was, somebody's friend who did a good job on their leg. So it literally they were as committed, the coaches too. They did it for nothing. They did it for the love of the game. And that, I think, is why we're all still so close as a group. That those administrators are just as much part of the team as we were, really. And then afterwards, there was some structure, and you started to get some professionalism in, and people, there ended up being interviews for jobs. I mean, my ex Steve, who was a coach at Waterloo, and he was an England students player himself, played for the North for the men, so he knew about international rugby. The protocol and stuff like that. He just turned up to watch my England training sessions in the early days. And Jim Greenwood, as head coach, said, "Hello, Steve." And when he realised he'd played for Waterloo, which was a top men's team at the time, and the North, he said, "Would you like to help out with some of the scrummaging?" So that's how Steve ended up as a coach. He didn't apply for the job. He was literally invited in by the coach. And like Steve Dew, who was head coach, dear Steve Dew, who was my head coach when I was first or the second year I think I was England captain, he got a friend of his who he knew through coaching to see if he wanted to get involved, Eric Field, and it was friends of friends in the early days, partners of girls who played, Simon Crabb and Mark Francis, who were partners of girls who played rugby. Debbie Francis played for England. They were involved with England in the early days too. And everybody did their bit, but they did it for the love of the game. Yeah. And gradually, as it became more professional, obviously there were processes to go through and people were interviewed and people had to have qualifications and all quite rightfully so. But the people who set us on the path did great things for us, and it was thoroughly enjoyable.
What about dealing with things like diet and nutrition and injuries and all of those sorts, and rehab and things?
We did our best. Being a PE teacher, you have a sort of rough idea about a healthy diet and a sporting diet and things like that. But and because it was completely amateur, we were amateurish off the field as well, I suppose. We still enjoyed a few beers after the games, but we had a good time as a result. And I sometimes worry that the people now miss out on that fun that we used to have. Yeah. But we used to jokingly laugh. We were only young, early 20s, and you'd go to watch the men on a Saturday, and the men would play, and then you'd all have a few beers in the bar, and then we'd go, oh, it's 10 o'clock now, so we'll stop drinking now because we've got a game tomorrow. So that was the start of us being professional, but we'd been drinking from 4:30, so it wasn't an ideal preparation before a club game. But I can't help but being a trifle envious of the support that people get who play now, and the world-class back room teams that they have, fantastic doctors, medics, and they're being analysed, and they've got gum shields that check if they've had a bang on the head, and it's just, they're so well looked after now, and you can't help but be a little bit envious. But I wouldn't, as I've said, and I say over and over, I wouldn't change a thing.
Yeah, you mentioned the asthma, but were you troubled by injury during your career, or were you one of those lucky people that steered clear?
I was generally quite lucky. I had a few nasty nose breaks, a compound one, which was basically a Scottish player's elbow took my nose across my face, and then she put a hand in my face and apparently ended up with a piece of my nose bone in her hand. So not a very nasty, vicious injury, but they were the days when you were allowed to put your elbow across somebody's face and break the nose. And I broke my nose and both cheekbones in a tournament in Canada. Played on with nasal tampons in, played another game on the Wednesday afterwards, and it's only when I got home to England and had an x-ray realised that I'd actually got hairline cracks down both cheekbones as well as a smashed nose. So thankfully, life-threatening situations like that don't happen nowadays, because there's no way a player would stay on the pitch with an injury like that. But that was, looking back, I was lucky I didn't get another knock on my face, because it not only could have finished my playing career, it could have finished me off as well. Yeah. So it's much better now that people are looked after. I had no major leg injuries, shoulder injuries, that sort of thing, just nose. Yeah. And I can still breathe through it. It's a funny shape, but I can breathe through it. So I'm not complaining.
Brilliant. And when it came to hang up your boots, did you know that it was the time? Was it, because a lot of people say, I knew it was time, or did you go reluctantly, or how did it happen for you?
I've still got my boots packed in my bag just in case. I've got a bag. No, when I wanted to finish for England, I was 37, fit as I'd ever been, but the training was so all-consuming at that time. I knew that I couldn't stay at the top of my game any longer because I was getting too old. I'm still very proud of the fact that I smashed all the records in the fitness test, the last fitness test I did. Really? I'm very proud that my last full game, the semi-final in the 2002 World Cup final, was one of my best performances. And I knew I had to go out on high. Sadly, we didn't win the World Cup that year. That was the dream. We were going to win the final as well. I got very little time in the final, so I couldn't realise that final sort of. I wasn't able to bow out on a high, sadly. But I was 37 and knew that couldn't last. So I stopped playing England rugby. It was my choice to finish at that World Cup. And the only reason why I wish I played a little longer was the very next game that England played was actually at Twickenham. And I'd always wanted to play at Twickenham and never been allowed to play at Twickenham. So thankfully I was had the lovely honour of becoming the president of the Women's Union. So one of my first games as president of the Women's Union was to walk down and shake hands along a red carpet on Twickenham's pitch. So I got onto the pitch in my high heels as opposed to my boots. But it was one of those nice times where you look back and think, I didn't get there myself, but that's where they are now. So it was worth it all. And of course, now girls still get the chance to play at Twickenham, but not very regularly for the right reasons, because we need to share the women's game with all the fans around the country. So it's been great that there's been games, up and down the country now.
Yeah, I mean, some would argue that it's great to play at Twickenham, but it's a vast empty stadium if it's not nearly full.
Yeah,
and
even if you get the record, so you get 17,000 people watching, it still looks empty at Twickenham. So it's a great target for 2025 to try and fill it for the World Cup, the home World Cup. It's a big target to go for, but you know what, we're gonna do our best to make sure we do. And I think everybody involved in not just the women's game, everyone involved in rugby will do their best to fill that stadium for that World Cup final, and let's hope England are in it. But yeah, it's a long way off, but it'll be here before we know it. It's very soon going to be 2023, and 2025 is not far away.
Yeah. And you're talking about how important is that relationship between men's rugby at the England level and women's rugby? Because initially there was sort of like two separate governing bodies, weren't there? Yeah, and rightfully so. We had the women's governing bodies, and the RFUW, the England one, which was the latter one. They were working very closely with the RFU to make sure that they became part of the same thing at the right time. So it was a gradual, slow process and lots of hard work done by lots of people. And 2012, I think, was the time when women's rugby was governed by the RFU, which is quite rightly so. And it's great to see that at Twickenham now that rugby is governed now, not women's rugby and men's rugby. Rugby is governed, and that's exactly how it should be. And has the partnership always been smooth?
I think everybody's had a battle along the way. You've got to win over skeptics. You've got to, as I say, foster respect. And I think the long, slow process of becoming part of the RFU is vitally important. I think the people who push for things too far, people who demand things, people who say they've got a right to have things, that's not the way to go about winning friends and influencing people. You've got to do it slowly but surely and gradually, and almost be invited in if it's going to be a long-lasting thing. And you've got to make sure that once you become part of the RFU, that is your sole focus. And rugby is for everybody, boys, girls, men, women, and it's just England rugby.
And are there benefits from the interaction in terms of you share the facilities, but shared coaching and shared methods and techniques and things? Is there a sort of a two-way journey?
Yeah, well, I think the RFU staff work with men and women. Obviously, you have separate coaching teams because they're different playing teams, and that's understandable. But yeah, they do share good practice, and that can only be good. And it's lovely to know that it's not just sharing good practice where the fellas are telling the women's section what to do. It's a two-way process, and Simon Middleton, who's the current England women's coach, he won that World Coach of the Year award, and all credit to him. And he was totally humbled by it and said, I'm not the best coach in the world, but bless him, he's done a fantastic job, and everybody in the RFU will be learning from him too. And yeah, I think just sharing good practice is the way forward.
And when you look at the state of the England women's team now, what are your thoughts are going through your mind? I wish we'd had those facilities. Pride that they've come this far. A little bit of envy, a little bit of jealousy. That's what goes through your mind when you see them.
Absolutely not. I mean, there's little parts of you think, I wonder what we could have become if we'd had what they have now. That's only just an interesting, I wonder. It is. I'm in awe of them. They're just fantastic. The players, they're so skillful. And the most amazing thing is that strength in depth. Sort of over the years, there's always been a few world-class players amongst others that have trained and got really fit, but there's always been just a few world-class players going through. And if they got injured, you'd think, oh no, we've lost our best player, what's going to happen now? But now, you get your world's greatest Emily Scarrett goes down with an injury, and the people who step up to take a place are virtually as good. And then if they get injured, the people who take their place are virtually as good as well. So it's the strength in depth. It's that world-class, huge amount of players that we've got now that is so exciting. It's such an entertaining game, and people try to analyse why it's appreciated so much and why so many people are enjoying it. And I've said it before, I think it's simpler than all the coaches try and work out. I think it's the fact that 15 world-class women players don't fill as much space on a field as 15 world-class male players do. And the men's games become a little bit of a struggle, and there's not much space to exploit. But the women have a touch more space, and because the skills are getting better, the kicking skills are phenomenal now. It's entertaining, and they're using that space to produce a product which is good for all to see.
Is it a bit of a two-edged sword, particularly in England, that the England team, on the recent results, they've basically thrashed everybody except France, haven't they? Are they becoming too good in a way?
I don't think so. I think France and both. I think New Zealand will come back a different creature next year, later this year than they were last year, completely. I also think that the news of the professional contracts going to other Northern Hemisphere teams is great news, and they will improve. It's probably a bit too late for this year's World Cup to make them World Cup prospects, but you never know. I mean, in 2017, not 2017, 2014, when Ireland, who weren't considered a championship team, beat New Zealand well. It all depends on 15 players on the day or 23 players on the day, however many are playing, having the game of your lives. And that's the best thing about rugby. There's a lot of teams that could knock England off the pedestal that they are on now, like Ireland knocked New Zealand off in 2014. And England players will not become complacent. They won't be allowed to. And if they do, then there are plenty of people who'd like to be on the ball.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, you're saying the organisation in England is probably further advanced than it is in other countries, would you say?
Yeah. Leading the way, absolutely leading the way. And, Nikki Ponsford, who was part of that and was at the RFU for years, one of my old playing buddies who played at Waterloo and then played for England with her, and she worked with the RFUW and then with the RFU. Nikki did a fantastic job, so much so that she was sort of headhunted by World Rugby, and is now her job is to raise the standards around the world. So she's trying to do that globally, which is a huge job. And she did a great job with England. So let's hope she can raise the standards around the world and make the international matches more and more of an entertaining spectacle.
Yeah, because that is the basic problem for rugby, isn't it? It's got to create a worldwide global sport. You have to spread it around.
Yes.
And how important is sevens in that context?
I think it's very important. It's it has a different supporter base as well. It's not, you get different groups of people who enjoy the sevens, and it's so entertaining. I think it's great. I'm looking forward to watching it at the Commonwealth Games in a few weeks. It's a different rugby experience, and I think it's the sort of rugby where people go for a day out and buy into rugby because they have a great day out, and they're learning about watching the game almost from when they turn up to watch an international. It might be the first time they turn up to see it, but they enjoy it and they come back for more. So it's another part of rugby, just as is the development of the game of touch rugby, and we've just got to grow as many parts of the game as we can to win supporters.
Yeah, because 15 aside or 23 aside, as you say now, requires a lot of people, requires a lot of infrastructure, of backup, of cash, of money, and so on. And so it's hard to imagine that being available to many of the nations that you'd want to take up rugby. Is sevens the thing that fills that gap? Absolutely,
yeah, and it's played across more nations who can be successful and can take the odd scalp. So it's entertaining for those reasons. I think there's more chance of a junior nation taking a scalp in sevens than 15s.
Yeah,
why the crowds love it. So yeah, it's vital.
So to grow the game globally, though, it needs what does it need to become even bigger than it is now?
Well, more people playing and good volunteers. Like I did some work with SOS Kit Aid, who send kit out to minor nations and things like that. And so volunteers and charities helping to spread the word. And yes, support for the governing bodies in the nations where rugby is still only a minor sport, but trying to grow. And I'm sure World Rugby have got that as a priority to try and get it across the globe, really.
But the big elephant in the room, which we're sadly facing up to now, the story of Ryan Jones the other day with dementia, early onset dementia for the blokes who have become professional rugby players. Is that more of a concern for women's rugby?
I think it's a concern across all sports. And I think all the work that World Rugby are doing into the research and trying to make the game safer is really good. It's such a difficult thing to say whether somebody would have got dementia. I mean, a lot of people. I'm a part of a dementia charity, a trustee to a dementia trust, and who's to say that the person who's never played sport, who has dementia, who knows why they got it either? And it could be that the person who played rugby would have got it anyway. And it's so difficult to say specifically that it's because they've headed a football or they've been knocked out in a rugby match or they've boxed. It's so difficult to say why people get conditions like that. But if we can make the games, all games, safer by looking after people, and thankfully long gone are the days when you did break your nose and you were concussed and you were sent back on with tampons up your nose to carry on. And much though at the time I wouldn't have been dragged from the pitch, thank goodness nobody else will go through that, and it will help to stop anybody who might have developed the game through repeated head trauma. It will make the game safer going forward, but it's so difficult to blame a sport or to blame an individual incident when you just don't know something like dementia or Alzheimer's can affect anybody.
But that is something that will be brought up by concerned parents, for instance. What would you say to a concerned mum or dad, if their daughter said, I really want to play rugby?
Rugby gives you just the best experience in life. You look at all the sort of core values that the RFU say. It's that sort of respect and enjoyment and fun. And you just got to speak to people who are in the rugby family. It's wonderful. It's wonderful. And it's so joyous going to watch well-organised mini and junior sections and the fun and the enjoyment and the development of people, not just rugby. It's a wonderful thing. And I'd just say the benefits far, far outweigh the negative. So come along, have a look, see what's involved. Yes, the World Rugby community will try and make the game safer to make sure that there won't be any massive long-lasting effects. But unless you wrap yourself up in cotton wool and don't go out in the street and don't step into a road, if you want to look after yourself and think you don't want to get injured, you're not going to be fit, you're not going to have friends, you're not going to be mentally well. So just go out there and enjoy rugby for all the wonderful things it offers, in these days of not just physical health, it's about mental health more than anything, and keeping you in a friendship group. And I walk into a room of rugby players who are not seen for 30 years. Even on Saturday, we were remembering a lovely friend who had sadly passed away earlier this year. And I walked into a room full of women who some of whom I'd not seen for 30 years. And it was just like it was yesterday. And we had a fantastic day remembering our lovely friend. And that's what the rugby community gives you. It gives you a second family. And for some people, it is the family. It's for life.
And if you had a magic wand, what would you do to make rugby even better?
Oh. Well, selfishly, first of all, I'd make myself 20 again so I could have another career. That would be a selfish thing. But yeah, to make it even better, just if there was enough funding to get rugby into schools again. I know schools are worried about it. I know, having been a teacher, I did rugby at school, but it was a battle, and it was getting other schools to do it, and teachers, PE teachers in schools, and I mean state schools, not just rugby playing sort of private schools, become almost frightened of the time it takes to prepare a rugby team, frightened of not being able to spend time getting your kids to get higher grades in their exams. And PE teachers have almost become GCSE and A-level teachers, as opposed to sport and games for life sort of teachers. And I would like to get proper games played in schools again. Difficult with the RFU cutbacks and the lack of sort of CRCs, community rugby coaches and stuff. But I think it needs to go back into schools. And I don't think children need to play rugby every Sunday, every Wednesday, training in midweek to be fit. I just think they need to have a taster, because if they have a taster of rugby, they then look forward to playing as young adults. And we might not lose so many young adults to the game if they've only had a taste of rugby through the school years with occasional tournaments, as opposed to the kids who've played week in, week out from under 7, who were bored by the time they're 18 because they've done it for more than a decade and want to try different things. So I'd like to see it back in schools with occasional games and giving children a taster of what rugby could mean to them later in their life.
Is there anything you'd like to change about the culture of rugby? I know Hugo Monnier came out saying rugby's drinking culture, as he put it, has to change. You've mentioned good times with teammates, and I certainly enjoyed the after rugby side of rugby games and so on. Is there a perception? Is it a perception, or is it an actual part of rugby that there is this?
I think you can still have a few drinks after rugby. You can sing a few songs with friends if the people who do it are good people. I think the drinking culture over the years sometimes has had a negative press because there's been bullies who've done things that make people feel uncomfortable. And, you know, you wouldn't have a problem if somebody didn't want to drink or if somebody didn't eat a certain product. You know, it's for everybody. And, you know, if somebody's offended by something, one thing I say people should say, instead of being upset about it, complaining about it and going on to Twitter to moan about it, say to the person who said something that might offend you, maybe we need to think of a way of talking to them about it so that you're not having a go at them. You're just saying, just watch what you're saying, you know, that might upset somebody. Just to be welcoming for everybody who's involved. If anything's out of order, for people to pick up on it and say, that's a bit out of order, don't do it again, mate. And then if it carries on, then you can address it as a problem, but don't make it a problem without trying to help people who might be doing things they don't mean to do wrong.
Yeah. So looking at the future, rugby is going where? What's the next stage for rugby, and particularly women's rugby? Got a World Cup set up very well. Yeah. What's next?
Well, I'm not sure there's any further sort of world tournaments and things like that to do, but it's just growing the game across the world to make more countries possible winners of these trophies. You know, they talk about changing the structure of things like these Six Nations and to try and grow the game. But why do you need to break something or recreate something that's not broken? It's a fantastic thing in its own right. So maybe creating other tournaments that equally generate the same sort of amount of enthusiasm in different parts of the world. And just trying to find things that strike a chord with not only the players in the region, but mainly, number one, the supporters in the region, to make it a more of a global game.
And has rugby a responsibility as a business or as an entertainment? I mean, is it important to keep the spectacle, or is it important to keep the results?
Well, the business is absolutely vital, but the results are what will make the business more successful. So I think you've got to balance that very carefully and make sure one doesn't become the priority. I think it's a difficult one. I don't know what the answers are. I wish I did.
Yeah.
I wouldn't be a retired part-time worker if I knew the answers, but it's a difficult balance.
Yeah, but some would say that this win-at-all-costs attitude and the sheer professionalism and the extreme training and so on that people go is, I certainly think it is making rugby less of a spectacle than it was before, because there is so much emphasis on the physical brutality and the clatters and the collisions and the fitness, and it's becoming less and less fun to watch.
Yeah, I agree. And they've got to try and nip and tuck the laws to try and make it more entertaining. It's so difficult. I feel sorry for the referees and the officials with the laws the way they are and the amount of stoppage time and having to go by the letter of the law. You've lost the feel of the game that the great old referees used to have, where some things were left because they knew it wasn't done deliberately, and teams ended up with 50 15 players on the park for the whole game, and it was an entertainment right to the final whistle. So yeah, the laws need to be nipped and tucked. It has become a big physical struggle. I'm not sure how you make that any better. Maybe make the offside line a little bit midfield, a little bit further back, and create a bit more space. There's various rules like with the kick and the extra players going back that try to make it a bit more entertaining, but we're not quite there yet. And I think in a way the women's game is a little bit further behind on the physicality of it all. So that's why it's a little bit more entertaining now. Maybe as it becomes more professional, we may have the same problems. I don't know, but it's got to be a spectacle. It's got to be exciting. And if it's not, we're not on a very good path. But I'm optimistic.
I want to pick your brains about the TMO and all that. I mean, to me, it's dampening down the game and ruining it as a spectacle, because we have to keep going back to judge every little incident, and it's not so much fun to watch or I don't know, to take part in. What are your thoughts on TMO? Is it something we need to have for legal reasons, or is it being overplayed?
I think there needs to be more freedom given to the person in the middle, to go by their gut feeling. I mean, things look so different in real life than they do on a slow motion camera. Yeah. And I think if you just think back to the great referees of yesteryear, it was all about feel of the game. And I can remember being told off by referees for things that now you'd have been sent off for 10 minutes for, while we were carrying on with the play of the game, and they're giving a bit and you'd say, sorry, sir. And you'd just have a bit of banter, and you made damn sure you didn't do it again, because you knew if you did it again, you would have been off the field. And those sorts of things. I mean, I genuinely didn't do naughty things very often, but during games, I mean, I can think of one of my favourite players from another nation who every game could have been sent from the field for the things she did. However, she was managed by good refs and just sort of controlled and stayed on the field and made the games more entertaining. So yeah, maybe a little bit more give and take from the person in the middle. And if there's anything that's spotted by a TMO later that involves something like, let's say, somebody's put a finger in an eye deliberately, it can be dealt with after the game and they can be disciplined off the field, but not during the 40 minutes each way, which is getting longer and longer, and perhaps losing the attention span of those who are half inclined to go and watch rugby league or football instead.
And in terms of the game and the rules, I think we call them laws, don't we, in rugby still? But in terms of the laws of the game, is there one that you'd change? I mean, I come across lots of Americans and people from other countries and other cultures go, rugby, I just can't understand the laws. And even forwards can't understand what's going on in the scrum. And, there's all sorts of areas where experts, people who've played rugby or commentated on it for years go, don't know. Is there any law that you'd like to see tightened up, clarified, changed?
I can't think of any. I probably have had to think about it for a while. Yeah. I could think of it. I can't think of anything off the top of my head. But personally, I'll tell you the law that I was most unhappy with when they allowed lifting in the lineouts. I loved lineouts when it was just all about jumping power, and I absolutely loved it. Yeah. And then suddenly it was you could lift people, and people who couldn't jump were being lifted higher than me, and I was very, very unhappy about that. That was me being selfish. Well, but no, I mean, it once again, it's a difficult job to try and change the laws, and I can't think of anything specific. I mean, I did mention just briefly before, take the offside line back from the back foot somehow. How you do it, I don't know. Does it become more technical? Is there a laser beam across the pitch so people can see that where they're allowed to, who knows what can be done? But I think more space needs to be created in order for those with the entertaining skills to have room to demonstrate them. Yeah, well, my sort of theory is it's a handling game, and we shouldn't kick the ball away. And I think my brain is, I'm not involved in any way at all, but I would just say, if you kick the ball away, you're saying we don't want it. So the next person who touches it has got to be the opposition. So you just create a bit more space that way, and hopefully it takes back from all this endless kicking. At one time in one of the games at the weekend, there was just aerial ping pong. Both sides were trying to kick it as far the way down the field as they could, and they didn't want to risk anything, so they kicked it as far as they down the field. You thought, that's not really sport, that's not really entertainment, certainly not rugby as it
in my mind it should be, but you know, I'm well out of it. Are you still involved in rugby?
No, well, officially not anymore. I finished my last official role as Lancashire president a week last Saturday. So I had a little off-duty party because I've been in a sort of formal position for a long time. So I'm still part of the Lancashire board and look after volunteers in the area. I'm still on lots of rugby committees. I'm on a couple down at Twickenham, the World Rugby Museum Committee, and I do some of the Diversity and Inclusion Advisory Group, which is nice to be involved with. So yeah, I'm still involved in rugby at my own rugby club at Waterloo. I'm on several committees doing little jobs just to help keep raising funds for the club and stuff. So yeah, very busy. And I also help out with a dementia charity, which is
when you look back on your time as an administrator, was there one thing you'd say I'm most proud of having got that through or done? Or
not specifically as an administrator. I feel that, I mean, I'm still involved. I'll still be on the board. I'll still be the volunteers director. But as Lancashire president, I wanted to go to as many clubs as I could, and I managed to hit 72 in the season. So it was a busy season. And I think probably most proud of speaking to people who have never engaged with the county in any way, shape or form, and to speak to people who say, but what do you want from us? What do Lancashire want from us? I'm like, we don't want anything. You're as much Lancashire as I am. And it's probably just educating people in the county that Lancashire doesn't mean the one past president that you've got at your club who goes to the meetings. He's the Lancashire man. It doesn't just mean he goes to the meetings and you don't know anything about it other than Lancashire play in the county championship once a year. It's being part of the county for everybody who plays rugby in this area. So I suppose it's just getting out and talking to people who don't usually engage and realise that they are part of Lancashire County, and to try and work with the clubs as sort of in a friendly way and get more people involved in club rugby.
Talking of the county championship, there's the Gill County Championship Cup. Explain that.
Yeah, I was hugely honoured to have my name on the cup. I think it possibly stems from all my, I suppose, 10 years of being president of the Women's Rugby Union, 14 years as a player, 5 as captain. But I did actually, along with Jane Schindler and Helen Thompson, a group of people from Leeds, we organised between us the first Yorkshire-Lancashire fixture, which was the first county game that was played for women. It wasn't ratified by anybody. It was just, we said we wanted to play a game. We borrowed kit from the Colts team, from whoever was running the Colts team at the time gave us a Lancashire kit. They borrowed a Yorkshire kit, and we just organised our own game at Headingley for the first one, and then the next one was at Orrell, and we just alternated. I think we did 6 fixtures over 5 seasons, and it still wasn't taken on board by the counties officially, but we started the first of the county games, and it planted a seed, and then a few years later the counties got involved, and so that's possibly the link why. Although when I was introduced to one of the young England players, who obviously doesn't know me from Adam because she wasn't born when I was playing, she said, "Oh, Jill Burns, the Jill Burns trophy." She said, "Oh, I thought you were dead." She thought it was a memorial cup. I'm very pleased for Bill Beaumont and Jason Leonard that the county cups are all for people who are well and truly alive, not dead. So she did think it was a memorial trophy.
Thank you so much, Jill. We're coming to the end of our time. I just want to read out a couple of the chats. What an inspirational woman. Love her enthusiasm. That's Jean Joyce. And Kim Holland says, yes, she's really good. Makes me want to watch a game now. Great to hear good old-fashioned common sense, says Carol. So you've struck a nerve with our watchers and viewers, and we're very, very grateful for having you with us. Jill, good luck with everything in the future, and may everything go well for you in the future. Thanks a lot.
Thank you very much. Nice to chat to you, Alastair.
Take care.